My parents missed my medical school graduation to watch my brother play softball. Not a championship, not a state title. A recreational league tournament in Knoxville, Tennessee, for a team called the Blue Ridge Bandits, made up of accountants and mortgage brokers who played on Sunday afternoons. I stood in a coliseum in Richmond, Virginia, in front of 412 classmates and their families, wearing a borrowed stethoscope and a gown that cost me $62, and the 2 seats I had reserved in row 7 were empty. I smiled when they called my name. I walked across that stage. I shook the dean's hand. I took the photograph. I found my friend Claudia Torres in the crowd and stood next to her family like I belonged there. Because what I had decided that morning, standing in the parking garage of the Virginia Commonwealth University School of Medicine, was that I was done asking for a place at a table that had never been set for me. 4 years later, I was the attending physician on duty at the MCV emergency department when the paramedics wheeled in a 63-year-old male, blood pressure crashing, suspected massive MI. I recognized the face before I read the chart. I had exactly 30 seconds to decide whether to walk toward that gurney or walk away from it. The name on the intake form was Raymond Dale Hutchins. My father. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story, and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I want to know where you are right now. My name is Christine Dale Hutchins. I am 34 years old, and this is the most important decision I have ever made in my life. I grew up in Mechanicsville, Virginia, which is a suburb of Richmond, with wide front lawns and good school ratings, and the kind of community where everyone knows your family's reputation before they know your name. My father, Raymond, ran a mid-sized HVAC distribution company called Piedmont Climate Systems. My mother, Lorraine, taught part-time piano to neighborhood children and ran the social calendar of the family with a precision I genuinely respect in retrospect. My brother, Garrett Wayne Hutchins, is 3 years older than me, and from my earliest memories he occupied a different gravitational field inside our house. Not because he was smarter or harder working, but because he was a son, and in my parents' specific cosmology, that meant something structural. I do not say this with bitterness. I say it because it is the foundational fact without which nothing else makes sense. Garrett was the sun. I was a planet they occasionally acknowledged. I want to be precise about what I mean. My parents were not monsters. They attended my swim meets in middle school. My mother hemmed my prom dress. My father taught me to change a tire in the driveway on a Saturday morning in October when I was 15, and I remember thinking that was one of the best mornings of my life. The neglect was not cruel in any theatrical way. It was structural. It was the $750 they gave Garrett toward his first car and the $200 they gave me. It was the family trip to Florida that happened to fall on the same weekend as my National Merit Scholar announcement. It was the way my father's face rearranged itself when Garrett walked into a room versus when I did. I noticed all of it. I cataloged none of it out loud because I had learned very early that naming these patterns in my house was treated as evidence of my ingratitude rather than their imbalance. So I did what I have always done. I went quiet, and I went to work. I was pre-med at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, which was not my parents' first choice for me. My mother had suggested nursing gently, over and over, in that way that is a suggestion the first time and a position the fourth time. My father said nothing, which in his language was the same as saying no. I applied to UVA anyway, was accepted with a partial scholarship, and worked 22 hours a week at the Poe's Market on Barracks Road to cover what the scholarship did not. I graduated in 3 years with a 3.91 GPA and a thesis on triage protocol efficiency in under-resourced emergency departments. I was accepted to the VCU School of Medicine in Richmond on my first application cycle. I remember calling home to tell them. My mother said, "That is wonderful, Christine. Your father is right here. Hold on." And then I heard the phone set on the kitchen counter, and then muffled voices, and then my mother came back and said, "He says congratulations, he is in the middle of something." That was the moment. Not the graduation, not any of what came later. That phone call was when I understood completely and without any remaining room for doubt that I was going to have to build my entire life on a foundation I poured myself. Medical school is 4 years long, and those 4 years are a specific kind of endurance that I will not romanticize for you. I had $112 in my checking account the week of my first anatomy practical. I ate peanut butter on rice cakes for 11 consecutive days in March of my second year when my financial aid disbursement was delayed. My study partner, a woman named Keisha Renford from Arlington, kept a whiteboard in our shared study carrel that said, "We are building something permanent." I looked at that whiteboard approximately 800 times over 4 years. I am not overstating that number. Keisha is now a cardiologist at Johns Hopkins. We still talk every Sunday. During those 4 years, my family kept a kind of ambient distance that was almost comfortable in its consistency. My parents called once a month approximately, usually on Sunday evenings, usually for less than 10 minutes. Garrett called never, which was its own kind of honesty. My mother asked about my grades with the tone of someone checking a weather forecast, pleasant and impersonal. My father asked about my finances with the tone of someone who expected bad news. They did not visit Richmond once in 4 years. I visited Mechanicsville 4 times, always for Thanksgiving, always as a house guest who happened to share their DNA. Before I continue, please like this video and subscribe to this channel, but only if this story resonates with you. Drop your location and the time in the comments. I want to know where you are. The invitation I sent for my medical school graduation was a cream-colored card with gold embossed lettering that cost me $3.48 apiece at a print shop on Broad Street. I sent 2. I addressed them by hand. The ceremony was on May 15th, a Friday, at the Stuart C. Siegel Center on the VCU campus. My parents confirmed by phone on April 28th that they would be there. My mother said, "We have it on the calendar, Christine. We are so proud of you." I heard something in her voice that I recognized as the specific register of her social performance voice, the voice she used when she was saying a thing rather than meaning it. But I chose to believe her. That was the last choice I made out of hope where my parents were concerned. My father said nothing on that call. Garrett was not invited because Garrett and I had exchanged fewer than 40 words in 2 years. On May 14th at 8:17 in the evening, my mother called. She said, "Honey, I have to tell you something and I need you to know that we love you very much." Then she told me that Garrett's team, the Blue Ridge Bandits, had made it to the finals of their recreational softball circuit, and the tournament was that same weekend in Knoxville, and Garrett really needed the family there because he had been having a hard time lately. A hard time. My mother described this hard time in terms that included a stressful quarter at his accounting firm, some tension with his girlfriend, and a general low feeling that she was very worried about. She said, "You understand, don't you, Christine? You have always been our strong one." That is how she dismissed 4 years of the hardest work of my life. I was the strong one, so I did not need them. I set the phone down on my kitchen counter, which was a 6-year-old laminate surface in a rental apartment on West Grace Street that smelled faintly of mildew and coffee. I sat in the chair by the window. I watched the streetlight flicker on outside, and I understood that my mother had just handed me, without knowing it, the one thing I had always needed from her: complete clarity. I graduated on May 15th at 2 in the afternoon. The seats I had reserved in row 7 were empty until 90 seconds before the ceremony started, when an older couple I had never met, the parents of my classmate Dominic Ferreira, asked if those seats were available, and I told them they were. Dominic's mother, a woman named Patricia Ferreira from Falls Church, held my hand during the processional and did not ask why I seemed to be alone. She just held my hand. That is one of the two things I think about when I think about that day. The other is the way my own name sounded when the dean read it, how it bounced off 4,000 square feet of ceiling and came back to me, belonging only to me, earned only by me, Dr. Christine Dale Hutchins. No asterisk, no footnote. I did not call my parents after the ceremony. I went to dinner with Keisha and 4 other classmates at Terrence Cafe on East Gray Street, and I ordered the pan-roasted salmon and a glass of Chablis that cost $14, and I let myself feel what I actually felt, which was something I would describe precisely and without drama as a clean break. A bone that sets. You do not cry when the bone sets. You feel the alignment. That is what the rest of dinner felt like. My mother texted at 10:47 that night. It said, "Thinking of you today, sweetheart." I did not respond. I saved the text. I saved every text and email and voicemail from that point forward, not out of revenge, out of discipline, out of the same instinct that made me write down medication orders twice and triple-check dosages during residency. Documentation is not malice. It is precision. My residency was 3 years of emergency medicine at MCV Hospital, which shares a campus with the medical school and which is one of the busiest Level 1 trauma centers in the state of Virginia. Emergency medicine selects for a particular temperament. You have to be comfortable making irreversible decisions with incomplete information under noise and pressure and fluorescent light at 3 in the morning. I was very comfortable with all of those conditions. My attendings, particularly a physician named Dr. Marcus Webb, told me in my second year that I had the flattest affect under pressure of any resident he had trained in 19 years. He meant it as the highest possible compliment. I took it as one. During my residency, my parents called occasionally, and we maintained a relationship that I can only describe as functional and bounded. They knew I was a doctor. They did not quite believe it, I think, in the way that you sometimes do not believe a fact that contradicts a story you have been telling yourself for decades. On March 9th, a Thursday, at 11:43 in the morning, I was standing at the nurses' station at the MCV Emergency Department reviewing a chart when the radio traffic from Henrico County EMS came through the overhead speaker. 63-year-old male, acute chest pain, diaphoretic blood pressure, 88/52, and falling ETA 4 minutes. The triage nurse, a woman named Darnell Hughes who has worked that floor for 11 years, looked at me and I nodded and we moved. When the gurney came through the ambulance bay doors, I was at the foot of it before the paramedics had stopped moving. The face of the man on the gurney took approximately 1 full second to register in my brain. 1 second for the clinical information: pale, diaphoretic, in obvious distress, neck veins distended, skin cool and clammy. Then 1 more second for the personal information: the scar above his right eyebrow from a gutter he walked into at my 10th birthday party. My father. He did not recognize me immediately. He was in too much pain. My mother was not with him. I learned later that she was in the waiting room, having ridden in the front of the ambulance. In those 30 seconds, I stood at the foot of that gurney, and I felt something pass through me that I have tried many times to describe accurately. It was not forgiveness. It was not satisfaction. It was not the clean break I felt at my graduation dinner. It was something more fundamental than any of those things. It was the recognition that the decision I was about to make had nothing to do with my parents' decisions at all. My father was a 63-year-old man having a massive myocardial infarction, and I was the attending physician, and there was no version of who I am in which I walked away from that gurney. The woman who cried at that realization did not exist yet. The physician who started calling orders existed immediately. I called it probable STEMI. I activated the cath lab team, ordered the 12-lead EKG, pushed aspirin and heparin, and directed my resident, a third-year named Dr. Sarah Park, to manage the peripheral access while I moved to his head to assess his airway. My father opened his eyes and looked directly at me, and I watched the recognition arrive on his face in stages, first confusion, then disbelief, then something I had never once seen on my father's face in my 34 years of knowing him, shame, clean, unambiguous, full-faced shame. He said, and I remember this precisely, "Christine, not doctor, not I am sorry, just my name, the way you say a name when you realize you have profoundly underestimated what it belongs to." I said, "Dad, you are having a heart attack. I need you to look at me and breathe slowly. You are in the best possible place, and I am not going anywhere." That is what I said. Every word of it was true. The cath lab team arrived in 9 minutes. I handed off his care to the interventional cardiologist on call, a physician named Dr. James Okafor, who placed 2 stents in my father's left anterior descending artery. My father was in the cardiac ICU before 2 in the afternoon. Dr. Okafor told me, privately, that if my father had arrived at the hospital 8 to 12 minutes later, the outcome would almost certainly have been different. I nodded and wrote that in my personal notes that evening, not out of cruelty, out of documentation. My mother found me in the family consultation room at 1:15. She had been crying, which I registered without judgment. She was 61 years old and wearing a blue cardigan I recognized from years ago, and she looked smaller than I remembered her. She took both of my hands in hers and she said, "You saved his life." I said, "I did my job." She said, "Christine." I said, "He is going to be okay. Dr. Okafor is one of the best interventional cardiologists in Virginia. You can ask the nursing staff in the cardiac ICU for updates every 2 hours." She held my hands very tightly and she said, "I know we have not been fair to you. I want to be honest with you about what happened in that moment. I did not feel the relief that I might have expected to feel. I did not feel the sudden release of something long held. I felt precisely and quietly that she was telling me a true thing approximately 4 years too late and approximately a lifetime too late before that. I said, "No, you have not been." Then I said, "But he is going to be okay." I said it because it was true, and because I wanted her to hear that I had made the choice without condition, not as payment for an apology she had not fully formed yet, not as a bargaining chip, not as theater. I had made it because it was right, and because I was built for exactly this. My father recovered fully. He spent 4 days in the cardiac ICU and 6 days on the step-down unit. He attended cardiac rehabilitation for 16 weeks at a facility in Henrico County. I visited him twice during his hospital stay, in my capacity as the physician who had overseen his initial stabilization, and once as his daughter, which was a distinction I held very carefully in my own mind. On that 3rd visit, he asked me to sit down and I sat. He talked for a long time. He said things that were halting and imprecise and clearly assembled by a man who had not had much practice at this kind of speech. He talked about his own father and the things his father had taught him about sons and about daughters and about what mattered. He talked about the graduation and used the word wrong for the first time without me having to supply it. He said, "I was wrong to let that happen. And I knew it was wrong when it was happening, and I let it happen anyway, and I do not know how to ask you for something you have no obligation to give me." I thought about that sentence for a long time after I left his room. I am not going to tell you that we are a repaired family, because that would not be precise, and I have no interest in telling you a comfortable thing that is not true. What I will tell you is that I have dinner with my parents at their house in Mechanicsville 4 or 5 times a year. I initiated those dinners because I chose to, because I determined that the benefit to my own life was real and not theoretical. Garrett attended one of those dinners and apologized for his absence in a way that was brief and deflecting and incomplete, and I accepted it at the value it was offered and moved on, which is different from forgiving and different from forgetting and exactly right for where I am. My career is my own. I am the Assistant Director of Emergency Medicine at MCV as of 18 months ago. Dr. Marcus Webb retired last June and told me in his retirement remarks that I was the best thing to come out of his training program in 22 years. I bought myself a dinner that night at a restaurant on Carey Street, and I sat alone at the bar and I ordered exactly what I wanted, and I was completely content. Something I have thought about many times since March 9th is this. My parents did not make me a good doctor. The isolation they created made me precise and self-sufficient, which are useful qualities in emergency medicine, but I do not want to give them credit for the instrument by describing the damage. I became a good doctor because I worked for it, because Keisha sat across a study carrel from me for 4 years, because Dr. Webb pushed me past every comfortable limit I thought I had because I showed up at 11:43 in the morning and looked at a man I had every reason to leave and chose instead to lead with what I knew how to do. That is the story, not the betrayal, the choice. That is what I want you to take with you. I want to ask you something before you go. If you were standing at the foot of that gurney, what would you have done? I am genuinely asking, not because the answer reveals whether you are a good person. I think most people reading this are good people. But because I think the question surfaces something real about what we decide to carry and what we decide to put down. Tell me in the comments. Tell me your answer, and tell me where you are and what time it is. I read everything. My name is Christine Hutchins. I am a doctor. And I am, at last, nobody's strong one but my own. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next story.